Hello, friends, neighbors, and fellow Medfield residents. My name is Steve Callahan, and I have the distinct privilege of being the co-chair of the Warrant Committee.
And I'm Bob Sliney. I've been on the Warrant Committee for 6 years. I also have the privilege of working with Steve and Emily and the team this year.
And we have asked Emily McCabe, one of our newest members to the Warrant Committee, to join us this year. Emily, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Steve. So I was born and raised in Ohio. I actually had a career as a business consultant for about 5 years, after which I decided to change my career and I pursued a degree in veterinary medicine. So I'm now a veterinarian. I practice in Walpole. I live in Medfield, obviously, with my 3 kids and my husband. We made it back here because my husband grew up in Medfield, and we kind of always knew that we wanted to end up here because he had such a great childhood. So being from Ohio, I was new to the town meeting process. I actually didn't really know what it was when I got here. And I started attending the town meetings when I moved to Medfield. And I really just enjoyed going. I found that it was both kind of nerdy cool to go, participate in the legislative process. But I also was really inspired by the volunteers of the town that help the town run, most specifically the Warrant Committee. And when I would go to town meeting, having not had that kind of background, I felt that the Warrant Committee, the way they spoke and the comments that they put into the actual warrant was really helpful to me as a citizen to more effectively participate and to feel like I could vote on the issues more from a more educated standpoint. I met with Scott McDermott last year and talked about how I could get involved and that I could actually join the committee. And so, anyway, yeah.
Well, that's great. We're very happy that you're on the committee, and you've been a great addition. And we do have. Unfortunately, we can't have all 9 of us here, but we have other members that have joined too this year, and I think everyone's got different perspectives and strengths and has added a lot to the committee. So, one of our objectives doing this, we did this for the first time last year, is really to inform and educate the residents of Medfield about both our town finances and the articles that are before the town meeting. But before we get into all that, Bob, I thought maybe, you as the veteran on the committee, no pun intended there, I thought maybe you could tell our viewers a little bit about the Warrant Committee and what we do and how we operate.
Sure. So there's, as Steve mentioned, we are 3 of 9. We're appointed by the town moderator, and it's really an advisory council as such. It's our responsibility to do really, 2 main functions. One is to study the financial issues, budgets, capital expenditures, and investments. And second, to evaluate the warrant articles that are presented to the town that come from the town administrator, from the select board, the planning board, and in many occasions, citizens' petitions. We have a broad background of people, and it really does reflect the town, both geographically and also in terms of experience. As Emily mentioned, we know we have a lot of new people in town, and Emily's perspective is one that I hope resonates with new members of the community as well. Our job, we have the opportunity to meet with all the town departments, and really one of the gratifying elements of the town is to see how many people are engaged in committees and different opportunities to meet with the town management, to meet with the people who run the departments, whether it be the DPW, the police and fire, park and rec, library. So it really is a very satisfying. So what we try to do is glean the information as best we can. We conduct public meetings so that we can get input from all the citizens. And we meet with the school administrators as well. And the opportunity is to take and formulate our best judgment on whether these are consistent with the articles, are consistent with both the objectives of the town and also with the character of the town. But I will add that it's important for you as citizens to read the information, to see the warrant reports, because it's one of our perspectives, but it needs to have your engagement as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Let me also add to that we, you know, before we kind of dive into all the articles and the fiscal update, we're not going to have time to cover all the articles in the warrant. There's I think over 30 of them. So what we've done is we've and before I go further, I just want to say all the articles are very important, right? So everybody should definitely do what you said, Bob, and get educated on them. Read the report that gets mailed to residents. But we're just going to focus on what we think are the non-routine financial articles and or the more significant ones, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that's some of the ones. There's a lot of articles that happen every year, so we won't spend time on those. And in the report, as Bob mentioned, are recommendations, and we, for one of the first times since I've been on the committee, we've actually completed our work early so that we have actual warrant committee reports and recommendations for every article that's going to be included in that printed warrant that gets mailed out to the residents. So. And then you can always, look at any of our meetings and deliberations that are available on the town website or YouTube or, stuff like that.
To get started, Steve, can you take us through a little bit about how we balance the finances?
So sure, Bob. As we look at the fiscal update of the town, it's important to note that the budget addresses many areas, right? So we first look to the operating budget, which is the main area of providing services to the town through the school and municipal departments. And it's the most familiar to everybody, but it's also important that we look at the capital budget. We've got to make sure that we're maintaining our facilities and providing appropriate and efficient equipment for all the departments, especially our public safety and the public works and school departments. And we also need to address our reserve accounts, making sure that we have appropriate funding to protect the town in case there's a recession or we have an emergency need that comes up. So, and it's also, the reserves are an important component of our credit rating. And we also need to address our long-term liabilities. We do have large liabilities for OPEB, healthcare, retirement benefits, and our pension. So trying to address all of those things in the context of our tax bill is it's, as you can expect, that's not easy. It takes a little, a little thoughtful, judgment that goes into that. But I think, over the past few years, the select board and the finance team and our committee, Warrant Committee, have done a pretty good job of ensuring that we are presenting comprehensive budgets that look at all those areas. So, I don't know, maybe now that we've talked about that balancing act, right? Bob, maybe it would be good for you to let everyone know what are the headlines, right, of what we've been up to for the FY25 budget.
Sure, and I think to reinforce what you just went through, Steve, it's while you look and presentation today is the fiscal budget for a year of 2025. A lot of consideration goes into the long-term planning. We do have a 5-year plan in place, and that's very important. We took a look at, as Steve says, we try to anticipate liabilities. We try to measure the requirements on reserves and stabilization. So, and these have been some important changes that have come in through the Warrant Committee's diligence and the cooperation of all the departments. So,
Yeah.
So the operating budget, most importantly, I think to add is that we have a balanced budget, and that is our first and foremost objective each year, is to manage the budget with the town, with the schools, to stay within the capabilities of the revenue that the town can generate. And I think it's really significant that, and you'll see later that I think this is like the 6th year in a row now that we've been able to put forward a balanced budget without an override, and I think that's really important. We're proposing prudent use of free cash. That'll go over in a bit, more little detail on that, but free cash is kind of a detail of which is kind of an oxymoron. It's not free, but it's available, and it comes, and you'll see how that's been used in a very prudent manner to build up some strength in the budget. We continue our disciplined approach to achieving operating the results that's sustainable. So as I mentioned earlier, we build this in with the anticipation that is this sustainable? We don't want to create a situation where we'll overspend in one given year and create a hole for ourselves looking forward. This includes following our financial policies, and that's another area where the town has made some great progress, I think, over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of imposing disciplines on itself, which are already important to ensure that policies and our reserves and our spending, capital budgeting, as Steve had mentioned, is a 5-year process, and there's a lot of discipline that goes into that. So very good. And lastly, staying disciplined on the use of the free cash, limiting to one-time appropriations and funding for our long-term OPEB liability. So Steve, I know we've implemented a new approach to the budget process, and I think that we'd all agree it was very successful this year. So can you take a few minutes to explain what changes and the impact?
Yes, we did implement a new budget process. But before I go into that, maybe just a few words on what the old process was that we all wanted to escape. And basically, in the past years, ever since I've been on the committee, departments would all just kind of submit their budgets, and it would kind of roll up, and the result was basically Warrant Committee would get a budget that would be substantially kind of out of balance, right? And so we'd have to go back and forth, and there was a lot of time and effort to sort of go back and forth between departments, department heads, and various committees. So, and sometimes that would delay things, so that, a few weeks before town meeting, we were still trying to debate the final numbers. So we changed things up a bit this year, and in the summer of 2023, Bob, you might remember this, we started meeting with town officials. We met with the town administrator, the school committee folks, and we talked about our vision of what we'd like to do and how we'd like to move forward with these changes. And so one of the changes we did is we pulled forward all the capital budget stuff. We kind of know what our free cash is in the summer. So the capital budget committee was great. They moved their work forward, so they got through all of their reviews and approvals. It kind of came to us, and so we pulled that out of like the busy season, of winter months, and so that was a big help. And then the other thing that we did is we worked with Christine Triowile, the town administrator, on the development and communication of operating budget guidance. And this was sort of a new concept, so we introduced for both the municipal and school departments what's the right level of increase that would keep us within a Prop 2.5 framework. And so we looked at budgeted revenues, what our fixed costs were, came up with what was left over, and that got shared based on some historic, agreed upon percentages of 75% to the schools and 25% to the town departments. So I think, I think everything I've heard is that there was good feedback from this, and everybody appreciated this upfront guidance. But Emily, I thought as a new Warrant Committee member, you might have an interesting perspective on sort of what the process is.
Yeah, well, when I first joined the Warrant Committee, I kind of got the impression that all the work happened, right at the end, just like we all wait to do our taxes till the very end. And as humans, we do like to procrastinate, but everybody knows procrastinating never really works out that well. And so this whole idea of going through the numbers first and then not only presenting them to the departments to give them a framework where to start, but also educating the new members of the Warrant Committee with how the revenues of the town kind of come all together, and then what buckets of revenue there are for all the expenses was super helpful to me, because this was all new to me. So to see kind of how it got put together earlier in the year and understand the pieces of the puzzle was very helpful to me, but also the schools and the town, I think multiple times, said that it was better for them too. So it was really great. It was a good first year for me.
Great, that's great.
Now we have a new process. We have a balanced budget within the 2.5 framework. Steve, you mentioned during your talk, I think one of the benefits of this process is it gets us to a responsible budget based upon what revenues, and allows for more time to anticipate some of the issues that are ahead of us that we may not be able to deal with right now, but we need to keep it in. So can you give a little background on some of those thoughts that you have?
So that's a good question. As we look forward to future budget challenges, which, one of the things the town did 2 years ago is they started doing a 5-year projection of revenue along with expenditures. And we could see that our forecasted expenditures are outpacing that revenue forecast. So there could be some relief if and when the state hospital, redevelopment is completed. But we really don't expect there to be significant relief until fiscal year 2030. And that's because that's the year that the pension plan gets fully funded is at the end of fiscal 2029. So future budget years are going to be a lot more difficult and more challenging than this year. We have a lot of pressure that's going to come from kind of 3 areas, right? One is we have collective bargaining agreements. They're the biggest part of our expenditures in the town, and they are coming up for, they're expiring, so they're coming up for renegotiation. So the teachers expire at the end of fiscal 2026, and then the town, police, and fire expire at the end of 2025. And then secondly, as we all know, the state is experiencing some challenges with their fiscal situation, and state aid to municipalities is starting to come under pressure. Historically, has not kept pace with wage inflation and cost increases. So, and then lastly, as we all know, we're still planning on a new elementary school, and so the building project continues, and it's going to result in a significant increase in our property taxes if it's ultimately approved by voters, our town meeting and voters. I know there's been some preliminary estimates that have been run, and probably in the range of depending on sort of support from MSBA or not, it's probably $1,000 to $1,300 on the average household. So those are some of the challenges that we're faced with.
Those are definitely some serious challenges. But I think that the process that's been put in place allows us the opportunity to evaluate those
Yeah.
and to anticipate. We have there's so many moving parts, and some that will, are foreseeable in the future, and some that aren't foreseeable that come in a given time frame. And I think the basis of the focus being we want to spend within our means provides that discipline from which we can do a lot of analysis. So back to fiscal 25, Emily, what are some of the big picture areas that you've seen in the operating budget?
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, so for FY25, there were, I would say, about 3 big buckets of highlights. Firstly, the school department, of course, needed to add 3 full-time equivalent positions. And there was a need for additional funding for special education, specifically for out-of-district expenses and transportation. On the town side, there was the addition of a half-time equivalent position for Parks and Rec Director, and then a 3/4 full-time equivalent position for the Conservation Committee. In addition, on the town side, as we all voted for in the last town election, we did move to have a new collective bargaining agreement for the police department, and that caused an increase of $246,000 in the budget. Luckily for us, the town was able to negotiate a new health insurance renegotiation that saved $279,000. So that really helped to balance those other expenditures out. But those, I'd say, were like the main highlights.
Very good, thank you.
That's great. So that's kind of the budget. But Bob, was there anything that any requests that didn't make it into the 2025 budget?
There's always requests, as you would expect, to come in, and I think that, again, the process that we put in place, the constraints were not arbitrary, the constraints were fiscal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this gave each one of the schools and the town departments the ability to understand kind of the equity of that. And again, and as Steve has mentioned, we can anticipate this. If the department feels as though it's a got to have, then you have to find a new revenue source. But at this point, we've been engaged in that. The school department had about $355,000 of money that they had to manage through their budget process to reduce from their, I won't even say it's their optimal, I would say it's their desired budget. Mm-hmm. So that was very much important, and as also the town departments, about $169,000, and a similar situation where all were engaged, they went through it and understood the process. Yeah, there's about $500,000 of spending that the town would like to have,
Right.
but can't fit into its revenue.
Yeah, so these are identified needs that
Correct.
That are still there, I guess.
Yep.
But, well, that's helpful. So, how about the revenue side? What are the assumptions that we have in the budget for revenue?
Well, we've assumed some new growth in the new year of about $475,000, and some local receipts growth of about a little over $500,000. The local receipts growth primarily are up in $180,000 in department revenue. The transfer sticker year is 2025, so that'll give us a boost of revenue again. And then there's an increase in interest income from a higher interest rate. So on the flip side, we pay higher, but on the side that, if to the extent that the company, that the town has managed its cash through its treasurer, it gives us some additional revenue. There's about $100,000 in revenue growth for licenses and permits, and about $100,000 for motor vehicle excise tax. That's essentially what the new revenue for the current year is coming from.
And Emily, when we add all this up, what are the sources?
Well, looking first at our revenues, the FY25 total budget is $78 million. The pie chart shows you that the main part of our revenue comes from property tax. As you can see, it's 73%. We might actually have a pretty typical state aid for a suburban community. So you can see our state aid comes in at $8.6 million or 11%. That is typical for a suburban community. If you were to look at a city, it would be much larger. And then finally, 6% of our revenue comes from local receipts. So as you can see, we are very reliant on our property tax revenue, and it does make it challenging to present a balanced budget. Our revenue source is restricted by a formula called Prop 2.5, and we must always make sure that we can balance our budget within that rule.
Yeah, and for anyone listening to this that doesn't know what Prop 2.5 is, it's a formula that is passed, I don't know, many years ago that limits the amount of property taxes that can be raised in a community. It doesn't. Some people get confused. They think that it's for their tax bill. It can only go up 2.5%. That's not the case. It actually is the town levy can only increase 2.5%, and they do allow for some new growth, for new construction and stuff like that. But that's kind of the formula. So it's there to sort of balance out the fiscal discipline of a town with taxpayers having to pay the cost. So speaking of our tax bill, Bob, I'm sure it's on everyone's list of questions.
All politics is local, right? and I think it comes into the valuation. You can see that in 2019, there was a significant jump in the taxpayers' bill, and that is reflective of what we mentioned earlier, which were 2018 overrides. After 2019, we've settled back down into increases in the 2.5 to 3.3% range over the next 6 years without an override. So it's important, as Steve just mentioned, 2.5% is the tax levy limit, but with the overall changes in growth, the estimate in next year of 2025 will be 3.3%. This is based on a single family average assessed value of approximately $900,000. That you can see how the town has benefited from some strong financial management within our constraints. Back in 2019, because of the override, we were 15 in the state. And so there are only 14 communities in the state that had a higher tax rate than we did. Now we're at 21, and that is closer to a historical average, as you say, going back to fiscal year 12. So we're doing our best to work with the town, with departments, and with the schools to manage the increases on an annual basis, notwithstanding some of the challenges that lay ahead of us.
Yeah, that's great, Bob. Yeah, it's certainly moving in the right direction, right? A result of a lot of hard work from the committees and boards in town that pay attention to this stuff.
So that covers our 25 budget for revenues. Now, what about the expenditures, Steve?
Yes, this is Article 21. It's the biggest article in the warrant from a fiscal perspective. It's our operating budget for fiscal 25. Here on this slide is a comparative of our budget for 25 versus 24. And the operating budget for 25 is about $72.6 million. It's an increase of 3.6%. So you can see the actual increase before the debt service is 4% because our debt's getting paid off. As we talked about earlier, we have a new budget approach this year for the school and municipal budgets. And so we did provide that upfront guidance and that suggested limits to their budgets. And so the pool of available funds, as we talked about, was split 75 to schools, 25 to the municipals. Their ending percentage increases are fairly close, right? It's 4.7 and 4.8. That's the operating budget.
That 75-25 split, that's historically and I think comparatively with other similar towns, pretty consistent?
Yes, that's correct. And we went back and looked at, over a 10-year period, there's actually how things shook out here in town. Mm-hmm. That was the split. So, and both groups agree with that split. So,
right.
which is the most important thing.
So in addition, we've talked earlier about the concept of free cash and its use.
Yes, yes. So this is near and dear to my heart, free cash. As you can see on this slide, we had a very high level of certified free cash. Every year they certify our free cash, and at July 1st, 2023, we had about 5.1 million. How we use that free cash is sort of listed out here on the slide. We will talk about three of these uses later on: the Special Education Reserve Fund, the School Tax Impact Mitigation Fund, and the Elementary School Feasibility Study. After you sort of take away all those uses, you're left with about 1.8 million. And that's in compliance with, we have a financial policy test that says we always have to have 2.5% of our expenditures in reserve and free cash. So we don't spend that. We just spend up to that limit. You'll hear this more. We continue beating on this, but it's basically not using free cash for operating budgets, to balance the operating budgets. Because once you do that, you get into this vicious cycle of doing it one year, but then what do you do the next year? It's sort of like it's a death spiral almost. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I like to think about free cash kind of like your saving account,
Yeah.
but that the town has managed to put quite a few rules in place so that you don't blow your savings account on one thing. And so I think for the general public, it's useful for me to think about it as like, this is the savings account. This is not what we're using for our operating budget, but we have some projects, like some house projects that we want to use it over time, but we've got a lot of seatbelts on it so that we don't blow it all on one project.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to note that we did have a larger level of free cash this year. So the opportunity to allocate it in these areas with future needs is also an opportunity that had been worked with all the departments, but we can't anticipate it's going to continue at this level.
Right.
So Steve, when you talk about this, we talk about our reserves and we talk about use of free cash, fiscal disciplines. Can you talk a little bit about our credit and the importance that is to the town and how we manage it?
As we turn to the credit review, we don't have any articles in the warrant for new debt borrowings, but the town, they're always paying attention to this because they will come. We will borrow money. We have in the past and we will in the future. Paying attention to credit is important. Our latest rating was in 2021, and that was a AA by Moody's. If we have a good rating, it lowers the interest rate on the debt borrowing. So the last bond sale of the town was in fiscal 2022 or September 2021, when there was a very favorable borrowing environment. I joke with Georgia Kalivas, the treasurer, that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and we happened to borrow for the water department bonds, the 10 to 20-year bonds, at a 1.46% rate.
Wow.
So obviously today it's a much different borrowing environment. So on the question, Bob, of reserves, right, and are they headed in the right direction? The short answer is yes, I think. And here on this slide you can see the history of our reserves as a percentage of operating revenue, and that's after spending the free cash. Coming out of the COVID years, we did some really wise things with free cash. We built up our stabilization funds, the general stabilization fund, that was sort of at a pretty low level. And so now we've got reserves in that general stabilization to help with an economic downturn or an emergency. But this year we have two new articles that we'll talk about that are going to increase these reserves. And the first is the School Tax Impact Mitigation Stabilization Fund. And the second is a Special Education Reserve Fund. So if those are approved at town meeting, what this slide shows is that would bring our reserve levels to 10% of our operating revenue. And it's bring it up to about $7.3 million. It's a great story, right? And it's very important to maintaining our strong credit rating for the town.
I think that slide is also useful as we look back on and talked about how we've been able to have even growth over the past 6 years. It's a function of some of these reserves that we anticipate items so you don't get a big hit in a given year. And I think that's important to me as a taxpayer that we don't have a big surprise and someone's, because we can't anticipate the total amount, but we can anticipate that some of the events are going to occur. And having this reserve is a very prudent and I think a really important piece. If you're trying to understand the role of the Warrant Committee, this is one of them, to try and protect you as a taxpayer against big surprises. Now, as you turn our attention to the non-routine financial articles, there are 2 new articles mentioned that have an impact on our reserves. And Emily, can you give a little bit of background on this special education reserve fund?
Sure. So the first one that we're going to talk about is Article 13. Article 13 is to establish a special education reserve fund. This fund is governed by the MGL Chapter 40A, Section 13E, and it's established by town meeting to be utilized in upcoming fiscal years to help the town pay for unanticipated or unbudgeted costs of special education. We've seen a need for this when we sit down with the school department and look at their budget. You could imagine that the school department is largely made up of salaries to the teachers and the staff. But every year there comes a need for special education depending on the citizens of the town. And sometimes it's a lot. As we discussed earlier, one of the 3 buckets that I went through was that increase of about $400,000 for special education. And so this is a fund to actually set aside money that we can use if needed. And as we said before, it's going to be similar to how we manage free cash and stabilization funds, where there will be rules. And so the rules that get outlined in the article are that the school district must apply for this relief, and they can only get it if they are denied by the state or the money was otherwise not made available, so that they won't just use it whenever they want. There will be rules and seatbelts around using it. But the idea is that if we have this fund, then, and we can't get the money elsewhere, that we have it there and we don't need to do an override or require an unanticipated cost, is what Bob was saying before.
Yeah.
Thanks, Emily. And now, Steve, Article 14 establishes elementary school tax mitigation stabilization fund. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
The establishment of this elementary school tax mitigation stabilization fund, we've been talking about a new school building for quite a while, and an approval of a debt exclusion to accomplish that has been a core part of the town's capital project strategy for at least a decade. So in fact, I think it's been our largest capital project need for quite a long time. And there's agreement between the select board, the school committee, and the school building committee that they all support an elementary, school building project. So they also, everyone's obviously very supportive of finding ways to reduce the financial burden on residents. So we don't have any, like we talk about all these other reserves and stabilization funds, we don't have anything for our biggest capital project. And so there's no stabilization fund or reserve fund dedicated to the school building project. And so what this is, we now have an opportunity to create one, right? And so that's what this article is all about. And we'll identify future transfers, so the article that will come before town meeting is to take $900,000 you saw of free cash, put it into this fund. And then we'll also, over the course of the next few years between now and when we actually have to borrow, look for opportunities to supplement this year's 900 with additional transfers of free cash. We don't know what they'll be, but we can sort of look to that. But the goal is to identify $4 to $5 million, which is about the first year's debt service on a bond that we think we might have. And then take that and spread that out over the first 3 fiscal years to give residents tax relief. And so And then also, so in addition to the money we're able to save in this stabilization fund, there will be other proceeds from land sales that the select board's going to identify. The Hinkley South property is one of those that's already been sold, and there's proceeds of $450,000 that's sitting in an account. That's an example of something that they would identify that would go towards this coming up with the $4 to $5 million. So really the idea is to try to be proactive in helping to reduce that financial burden on residents, that's the concept behind this article. There's another article which deals with funding the near-term feasibility study for a new elementary school building. And I think that's Article 19. So
19 follows what Steve just walked through in terms of the focus on building the new school. And I think that after the vote in 2021, that there was a 2023 town meeting reconstituted the school building committee. And to date, they have been funded with $500,000. They're in the early stages, but we've learned from past experiences that the cost of this initial work is in the neighborhood of $1 million. Now, there's opportunities perhaps to save on work that's been done in the past, but frankly, that's with the school building committee. They're not going to spend what they don't need to spend, but the idea is, experience shows us that that this money is appropriately needed to address the urgent need of an elementary school, which I think that I don't think there's any disagreement in the town that we need a new school to add to our World War II vintage building. So this would be $650,000 in appropriation, also coming from the free cash, right?
Yes.
And it will give the school building committee the ability to use the $1,150,000. That money was reimbursed in the past, but because this is our second time, even if we were to be in the MSBA program, it would not be reimbursed. So this is a cost, and again, an opportunity for us, as Steve explained earlier, to anticipate and to be proactive. So I think we've covered the key non-routine financial articles. Steve and Emily, maybe you could briefly go through some of the general articles in this year's warrant.
So first, I guess I'll go through Article 28, which is the Town Charter Amendment, Moderator term. So this article is new this year. Our current charter states that the moderator shall be elected at the annual election for a term of 1 year. This article proposes to amend the town charter to allow for the town moderator to be elected to a 3-year term, like other elected positions in town. And so if this article is approved, it will require a ballot question at the March of 2025 annual town election. So there's a 2-step process. This town meeting, and then there's an election next March. And that's basically, this is a fairly straightforward article to understand. So I'll let our expert resident veterinarian here talk about the dog control bylaw.
Thanks, Steve. So Article 29 is a dog control bylaw, expanded dog leash requirement with an exception for off-leash areas. So to give a little background on this, the select board actually appointed a committee in fall of 2022. It's called the Dog Control Bylaw Committee. So this was a group of citizens in Medfield, both dog owners, non-dog owners, a veterinarian other than myself. And they were tasked with coming up with a way to change the current dog bylaw to make Medfield be, I think, just The current bylaw is written such that every dog must be on a leash or can be controlled by a person able to control its actions. And so what they found and what the animal control and the police department has found is that it's impossible to enforce when you have that wording in the bylaw, that they can be controlled by the person's words or actions. So the new proposal in the article is simply to remove that wording so that the dogs need to be on leash in certain areas. They were very sensitive and thoughtful to designate off-leash areas so that dogs and owners can still enjoy taking their dog off leash, which as a vet, as a dog owner, I think is very important. But this was, just in response to, citizens having some concerns about dogs. The other main change in this article for the bylaw is that someone walking multiple dogs is only allowed to walk 5 dogs at a time. And that was actually really studied well by the group. I believe there was a dog walker on the committee who, advised that they thought that that was a reasonable amount of dogs to safely walk.
That he could control.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well.
that they could control, right.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, I think, really helpful to the town, and we do support that article. So.
And then the other thing is that, some people might have questions on is like these off-leash areas. So there's 3 of them, as I understand it. They'll be designated by the select board, but the current thinking is that there's 3. One is sort of the behind Wheelock, the side of the railroad tracks, the north field of the Medfield State Hospital, and then what's known as the sledding hill across the street from the state hospital. So
Right.
I think I agree. They thought through some of the areas that,
And just to add 2 things. One is that it's made clear that this is a very difficult area to navigate, and I think that the committee, in our perspective, did a great job. But it's really step 1. So, but the second piece, and maybe to add this, is that this is the one area that we will have a minority opinion on that. And you want to explain to the people who read at home what that means?
We vote on every article as a committee, and we deliberate, we discuss, we ask questions, we do also, and then at the very end, we have a vote, and people say what they think. And in this case, the Warrant Committee is going to recommend this article, but the vote was 7-2. And all the other articles were unanimous on, but this particular one, there was a minority view. And so in the warrant report, you will see a small paragraph expressing their concerns with the article.
So I wanted to bring that up so that people at home could understand that when the Warrant Committee recommends passage or dismissal, in this case we were recommending passage, that it's 9 people giving their best judgment, and it's not the 10 Commandments coming down with a tablet. So and I think this is good, reflective of the conversations and the discussions that go on, that there is this piece.
The final general article is Article 30, and that's to give the select board authorization to dispose of some town-owned land known as Hinkley North. So some history here is that back in 2000, the town voted to purchase 10 1/4 acres of property that was known as the Hinkley property. And it was bought for municipal purposes, and it had, there's been a long plan to use it for senior housing. And so in 2019, they subdivided it into sort of the Hinkley South and the Hinkley North. And so the south piece is the part that's right next to the senior center, and that's already got housing on it. So they've accomplished, their objective when they first bought the property. And there's still 5.5 acres that are left. It's known as Hinkley North. And so this article is to give the select board just the authority to pursue options on that, and they still have to go through the normal land disposition process, which is quite involved. So that's what that is.
I think that's an important point too, that we're not, that this isn't authorization to sell, it's authorization for the select board to engage.
Right.
And
Right.
from that follows, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
significant issues that have to be discussed. But it does give the authority to the select board.
Yeah.
Right, and they came to one of our meetings and did express that, their main priority is to add benefits to the town,
Right.
and specifically, possibly financial benefits.
Right.
So,
So they have to have an asset of which they can't access or even consider is, I think, the argument that the select board put forward. Okay, so this year there are 3 zoning articles included in the warrant, but we're going to cover the 2 listed on the slide. And Steve, can you educate us on Articles 31 and 32?
Sure. Article 31 deals with the creation of the MBTA Community Zoning District. So this particular article allows for the town of Medfield to be in compliance with the MBTA Community's multifamily zoning Act, the requirements of that Act. I think it's Chapter 40A, Section 3A of the Zoning Act that's been passed by the state. The planning board and they have engaged Innis Associates, very competent consultant to work with them, and they have been working a lot. They've had lots of meetings, lots of hearings. We've met with them twice, and so they've been working on this zoning to come up with the compliant zoning to comply with this law. The result they came up with is sort of 3 overlay zoning subdistricts that meet the MBTA compliance model for location, size, zoning parameters, and then units to meet the requirements of the law. One of the things this law does that the state has done is they have linked compliance with this law with public funding grants. Okay, so you can't just ignore it if you want to get public funding. They've kind of linked them together. So, and as you can imagine, there's serious, implications to the town of Medfield in particular if we don't comply with it. So there's a lot at stake. It's a fairly complicated model that they go through, but I got to say I think that I've never seen an article where other than the state hospital, where we spent a lot of time, as much time on as a town with our various committees and boards, and really have spent this one's been well exposed, well discussed, deliberated, and I think the answer is a good one.
I would agree with you that this is it's been somewhat of an emotionally charged issue. Throughout the state, there's been different things written up on it, and the planning board has done as Steve had said, has done a wonderful job of presenting the information and holding public sessions, and those are available. So I would strongly encourage people who have a feeling on this to spend the time. You can just go to those sections of their meeting, and there will also be a presentation by the planning board at the town meeting. But as Steve mentioned, this is important to the town. It has ramifications, and the more we learned about what the proposal was, I think, Emily, we learned that this was a well thought through plan.
yeah, this is an important article. And so I think that I'm really happy that the Warrant Committee had a unanimous support of this, and they spent an incredible amount of time with us, helping us learn this, and it is complicated, but at the end of the day, the solution in this article was to comply with the law so that we don't lose funding from the state without compromising much of our town's character or the town, makeup. And so I have a really positive view on this article, and I do hope that other people find it that way as well.
Yes, and I think all of these things we talked about are in our report. So make sure you read our report, the Warrant Committee report for this article. We've kind of spelled it all out for you. The other zoning article we wanted to talk about is Article 32, which is the enforcement of zoning bylaw violations by non-criminal disposition. Our current bylaw is currently written in this area, the zoning area. The only means that the town has to enforce, a violation, it requires us to file an application for a criminal complaint in the Dedham District Court. And so, as you can imagine, that's time consuming. It generally is ineffective. So what this article does is it brings, one of the things the state did, a number of years ago is they did allow for a they understood the shortcomings of this criminal route. They allow for now, under a different section of the law, there's an alternative means to enforce in a non-criminal disposition, and it employs ticketing, doing tickets, and but you have to have enacted the bylaw in order for it to work, and so that's what this does. And I would say the rest of our, I would say most of our other bylaws already are caught up to this new non-criminal type approach. For some reason, I'm not sure why, but this was not done. So this is to sort of to bring it into sort of the 2024 year, I guess.
Make it manageable.
And I think there is I think the purpose behind this, I just want to make sure people understand, is that it's really to, if you had a neighbor that did something without going through the permitting process, and it was serious, it was affecting your property, right, in a way that, if they had done it the right way or gone through the permitting process, that it wouldn't happen. So this gives at least the town an ability to maybe sort of, and the building commissioner has stated that their first attempt at this is education and warnings, not to jump to the step.
It's not heavy-handed at all.
And
it's
so,
just compliance.
but they do recognize that there are situations where this would be appropriate.
Right.
So
and apparently the current situation is kind of a black hole. It goes to the Dedham Court, and it's never to be heard from again. And so
It's
that
not
makes
effective.
It's not effective.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that brings us to the conclusion of our presentation. We want to thank you for the time you spend in engaging with this video. We hope you'll find it helpful. We do have a town website for the Warrant Committee that if you have questions or comments, please add them to it. Our main point, I think, as I said, for my role in the Warrant Committee, what's the most gratifying is seeing the engagement of so many people, volunteers. If you see in one of our articles, you'll see there aren't a lot of people at these levels that are getting salaries. So you see the select board and the other departments. So hopefully you can see to that 2 hours of your time on May 6th, recognizing not only your role as the democracy of the legislative body of the town, to learn more about where our money is going and how it's being spent, to gain some confidence in in the work that's being done, and also to show a little appreciation to all those people who have put so much time in to prepare this and make this the town that it is. So Emily and Steve, I'll let you sign off. And
I just wanted to add that I know going to town meeting might not be like the cool thing to do. And I also know that as a parent of young kids, a lot of us don't have a lot of free time. But I can say from personal experience that when I go to town meeting, I leave inspired and somewhat entertained, to be honest. I feel like, generally speaking, the country's view of politics has kind of gotten to like a negative, view at sometimes. But, here in Medfield in Massachusetts, like we have like a really unique opportunity to go and actually be part of the legislative process. And it's not a huge time commitment. And I think really you can come away from that feeling really positive about our community and feel like you participated, even if it was just a little bit. And so I really hope to see you there on May 6th. And I hope that, we can help you feel like it was a worthwhile time spent.
Great. Thank
Well,
you.
well said, well said. And I certainly, agree with everything both of you said. The only thing I would add is there are really important matters before the town this year. It's one day a year, and don't leave these decisions to 250 people. Come and express your voice, your opinion, take part in it, and be a part of. It's the only pure democracy there is, right? The town meeting. So take advantage of that and take an interest in our wonderful community, Medfield.
Thank you.
Okay.
Best. See you on the 6th.
Thank you.